What is happening, guys? This weekend, we have the 100th UFC Apex card, obviously an event that all of us have been looking forward to for a very long time. And to honor it, we've got the most Apex card of all time that the UFC has put on. The main event, it is Carlos Prates against Neil Magny. We had a couple weight misses today. We had an opponent change during the week. We had a fight fall out with Ricky Turcios, dealing with what I assume was an illness related to his weight cut. So the card is completely changed from earlier in the week, and there's just no better way to honor the 100th card that is taking place at the Apex. It's not the best card on paper. It's probably one of the lesser cards that we've had of the entire year on paper, but there's some value to be had on DraftKings. We're going to walk through all of it right here in this video. So if you could do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for the MMA tools that we have here at Stokastic.com, links are down below in the YouTube description box. If you want a data package, we've got packages with just our projections and our ownership. If you want our sims, we've got sims packages as well. You could build all your lineups on our site. You can simulate all of the lineups, and that's what I've done right here. And we're going to go through this card fight by fight and go over some of these results of what it is that I'm going to be getting the most exposure to. And where we're going to start here is with the main event, Neil Magny against Carlos Prates. And when I saw this fight had initially gotten booked, I didn't realize it was going to be the main event of a fight night. I just assumed it was going to be, like an undercard fight on a pay-per-view, or maybe be like a co-main event or something like that on a fight night. But pretty wild that this is a main event, especially when you consider Neil Magny has not won consecutive fights since 2021, 22. His recent fight, and his most recent fight, he got knocked out in the first round by Michael Morales. So very rare that somebody gets knocked out in the first round that is not a highly ranked fighter and they find themselves in a main event. But I think it goes to show how much the UFC is looking to really push Carlos Prates by giving him somebody who still has a little bit of name value in Neil Magny and something that should be able to really elevate Carlos Prates in the rankings and get him into the top 15, assuming he ends up winning, which is certainly what the betting odds indicate. Carlos Prates, at the time that I'm recording this on Friday afternoon, he is anywhere from a minus 750 to a minus 850 favorite, one of the biggest betting favorites on the entire card. And the one thing that really stands out if you watch the latest Neil Magny fights, and it's honestly been an issue of his for a very long time, his inability to defend leg kicks, but in particular now at this point in his career, he reacts so poorly to them that if somebody lands leg kicks at the start of the fight, like he just immediately goes into survival mode, and the rest of the fight is just him kind of not trying to get finished. And if you look at Carlos Prates' fights, he lands leg kicks. His last fight against Li Liang, which was really a breakout fight for Carlos Prates, he looked really good in that fight, and I was interested in Carlos Prates as a prospect, but I wasn't really sold on him in particular because of a matchup that he had against Trevin Giles, where he ends up having a comeback win, but Trevin Giles was pretty soundly beating Prates before he rallied in the second round and got a finish at the end of the round. Then he looked pretty good with a finish over Radtke, but then he looked like a legit potential contender when he knocked down and finished Li Liang 3 times in their last fight. But talking about the leg kick aspect, look at some of the numbers here where Prates landed 10 of 11 leg kicks against Li Liang. Against Charles Radtke, he landed 6 of 7 leg kicks, and that was a fight that ended in the first round. In his fight against Trevin Giles, he landed 16 of 22 leg kicks. And once again, just talking to the fact that Neil Magny doesn't deal with leg kicks well whatsoever. It's something he has not adapted to at this point in his career. And the way I think this fight is probably going to go is Prates landing leg kicks in the first round, starting to break down Neil Magny, and then I think that's when he's going to be able to finish him late first round, maybe second round. So I like Prates to win. Neil Magny, if he's able to get his wrestling going, that is a place we haven't really seen Prates tested. So maybe that could be a path for Magny. I just don't think it's very likely at this point in Magny's career. Prates at $9,600. That's really the only sticking point here is just Prates, $9,600. He's also going to be really popular, around 40% owned. So with that said, I am getting to about half my lineups, a little bit more than the field. But this is not one of these main events that we need to be getting to in 100% of our lineups or anything like that. I hardly have any Neil Magny exposure. And then as far as Prates, clearly my preferred option. He's my second most exposed fighter on the card and still just slightly overweight to Prates. So good option, but there's also a handful of other pay-up options, which you guys are being astute here and looking at my ownerships and my exposures relative to the ownerships here. You'll see there are other high-priced fighters that have a comparable amount of exposure to Carlos Prates. But picking Prates to win, going to pick him to win by second round finish. Just the question becomes, how much do we want him at $9,600? He's in about half my lineups. Co-main event, this is actually the fight that I'm looking forward to the most on the card. We got Reinier de Ridder making his UFC debut, taking on Gerald GM3 Meerschaert here. And at 185 pounds, I do think there is a scenario here, maybe not a likely one, but a potential one, where Reinier de Ridder ends up becoming somebody who's a contender in the UFC. He was a champion overseas fighting in Asia, and now he's somebody who's kind of fighting a guy in Gerald Meerschaert who actually has a similar sort of fighting style to Reinier de Ridder. I just think de Ridder's a little bit better everywhere. The thing is, we just haven't really seen him tested against the highest levels of competition, but Reinier de Ridder, I think that he has better grappling than Gerald Meerschaert. I think he's better wrestling than Gerald Meerschaert. And where I think he should have the biggest advantage is in the striking and the power department. I guess the one thing you'd be a little bit concerned about is if Reinier de Ridder at some point, maybe in the later stages, fight gets extended, maybe he gets tired a little bit. Could Gerald Meerschaert end up catching a submission in that kind of situation? Because that's how we've seen Meerschaert win a bunch of his fights, where it looks like he's getting his ass beaten or just somebody takes him down and they're on top of Gerald Meerschaert and he's able to throw up a submission from bottom. But most of Meerschaert's fights do tend to finish inside the distance. You look at the most recent fights for him, 4 of his last 5 have finished inside the distance. His last 2 fights, a second-round win over Edmen Shahbazyan, which kind of played out the way that I just talked about would be one of my concerns for Reinier de Ridder, where Shahbazyan is just piecing up GM3 for the first round and a half. And then all of a sudden, Meerschaert gets himself in top position and gets himself a submission in the late stages of the second round. We saw Gerald Meerschaert take down Brian Barberena a few times, gets a second round finish in that fight. The one fight he had that did not end inside the distance as of late was the one against Andre Petroski, but Petroski nearly finished that fight and ended up winning by decision. Joe Pyfer knocked out Gerald Meerschaert in the first round, and then Bruno Silva, that was a fight where Meerschaert actually looked pretty decent on the feet, ends up knocking down Bruno Silva and ends up finishing him on the mat. So I think this fight should finish inside the distance. I just get a little concerned that will there be a lot of stalling in this fight where maybe Reinier de Ridder wins in like the second or third round, and there's a lot of other high-priced studs that I also like. So I'm going to pick Reinier de Ridder to win. I think second round TKO, maybe even a first round finish, but there are so many big favorites on this card, and I do have some uncertainty with de Ridder making his UFC debut. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe that's something that also slows the pace down a little bit. So I right now have him in 30% of lineups. It's right around even with the field, is slightly underweight, but I'm going to prioritize other pay-up options. Gerald Meerschaert, not a priority of mine, but he's okay as a punt option if you're looking to save salary and pay up for more studs for the slate, but not something I'm going to have a ton of exposure to. Gaston Balanos taking on Cortavius Romious. And this is a really low-level fight and one that I'm kind of surprised that there is such a big favorite in this fight, where Romious is north of a minus 200 favorite. Time of recording is anywhere from minus 210 to minus 230. And then this is also a fight that is priced fairly likely to finish inside the distance, right around minus 200 for one of these fighters to end up with a finish. It is, let's see, minus 200 to minus 260 as of right now are the odds for us to finish inside the distance. And for a really low-level fight that I don't have all that much confidence in either of these fighters, I'm going to lean more towards the Balanos side for a couple of reasons. First, he's much lower owned in our projections right now. Balanos pulling 22% ownership compared to the Romious side on the other end, 39% ownership. And there are, once again, a lot of high-end pay-up options like Carlos Prates. We're going to talk about Abdul-Malik. We'll talk about Julian Robertson. Denise Gomes, another one that's a really expensive option who's a massive favorite. We need salary savings somewhere. And here's a fight where I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of potential for it to finish inside the distance, and there's a little bit of leverage to be had. So I don't have a confident pick to win the fight, but just for the leverage purposes, I'm going to be on Balanos. I'm going to hope that he is able to pull off the win and also put up a pretty decent DraftKings score as well. Balanos is priced, you guys see here, at $7,500, and I currently have him in 35% of lineups, making him my most rostered fighter at the time that I'm recording, who's priced sub-K. Next fight that we have here, it is Luana Pinheiro against Jillian Robertson. Whenever Robertson wins, she scores really well on DraftKings. It's because of the way that she has her win condition set at, which is Robertson is not a good striker. She doesn't have great durability on the feet either. But what Robertson does have is very, very good grappling, and she's very aware of her strengths and weaknesses. So what Jillian Robertson does is she plays to her strengths. She looks for takedowns. She looks to grapple as early and as often as she can in her fights. She lands 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. She lands 2.83 significant strikes per minute. So while she isn't a great striker, she's at least active while she's on the feet and hunting for a takedown. What ends up happening is when she wins, she typically gets submissions and usually scores pretty well on DraftKings. Last fight notwithstanding, where the fight against Michelle Waterson Gomes did go to decision, but Michelle Waterson, who's now retired, always was somebody who was really tough to put away. Was a really a tough fighter and one to just tough to finish overall, really durable. But you look at some of the other fights for Jillian Robertson, 2 takedowns in a second round finish over Polyana Viana, 2 takedowns in a second round finish over Piera Rodriguez, 3 takedowns in a second round finish against Maria Akabova, takedown and a first round finish over Priscilla Cachoeira. So before the Michelle Waterson fight, she had finished 4 fights in the first or second round in a row, at least fights that were wins for her. And then even when she loses, her opponents typically end up scoring pretty well. So I think this is a good fight to target. I lean more towards the Robertson side, mostly because Luana Pinheiro, a couple things. Number one, she doesn't have very good cardio. She fades later in fights. And also, we've seen that she could be taken down with 66% takedown defense. Her last fight against Angela Hill, Angela Hill was able to take her down and submit her. If Angela Hill could take you down and submit you, Jillian Robertson is a much better wrestler and grappler than Angela Hill. So I think that she should be able to do the exact same thing. The other thing that I like about Jillian Robertson is that I think she has comparable upside, if not even higher upside, than Carlos Prates and Abdul-Malik, particularly because if Robertson wins, it's going to be from the wrestling and grappling, whereas Malik, Prates, I think they're more likely to win by knockout. So there is a scenario here where I think Robertson could outscore the 2 fighters who are priced above her, and she's also going to be lesser owned. We've got her projected for around 30% ownership, while north of 40% ownership going east of Prates and Abdul-Malik. So with that in mind, if I am looking to get a little bit more contrarian and pivot in the high end, I do think Jillian Robertson is the fighter to go to in that scenario. Next fight on the card, here it is. Mansour Abdul-Malik taking on Dusko Todorovic. And another really, really wide line here. We currently have Abdul-Malik is right around minus 500 favorite. Shortest line is minus 400. And then the widest line right now is minus 525. And then as far as the finishing odds, we've got this fight minus 550 to finish inside the distance. So betting odds indicating here that Abdul-Malik, big favorite, also somebody who we are expecting more likely not to finish inside the distance. It is for a couple of reasons. First, he's going up against Dusko Todorovic, who at a point in time was considered a kind of decent prospect. But here's what happened since then. He's dealt with injuries. He hasn't fought in a year and a half. So not only has he had the knee injury, but look how many times we've now seen Dusko Todorovic finished. Knocked out in the first round against Christian Leroy Duncan, knocked out in the first round against Chidi Njokuani, knocked out in the first round against Punahele Soriano. So in the last 3 years, he's been knocked out 3 times, and now he's coming off a significant knee injury and a 1.5 year layoff. All of those are really big flags when he's taking on a guy in Mansour Abdul-Malik who has massive power on the feet. So most likely scenario here is that all it's going to take is one shot landed on the chin of Dusko Todorovic, and the fight ends up ending. That's what the betting odds indicate is most likely to happen. For GPP purposes, I don't mind Todorovic as a contrarian leverage play just because it's so hard to find cheap options on this slate. But also, we've seen Abdul-Malik get taken down before, actually on his fight in the Contender Series. He was taken down twice before he got the second round finish. And we've seen Todorovic go to the wrestling at times. Now, who knows if he's still capable of wrestling after blowing his knee out and the long layoff. But the last time that we have seen him in some of these fights against really powerful strikers, like against Chidi Njokuani, for instance, Todorovic took him down twice in the first round before he ended up getting finished himself. We also saw him take down Maki Pitolo in their matchup. So Todorovic is somebody who at least has the ability to wrestle. And maybe that is a path where he's able to extend the fight and maybe wear down Abdul-Malik. But clearly, if you guys look at my exposures, I've got Abdul-Malik in 42% of my lineups. He's my preferred option. But Todorovic at only 18% ownership. I'm a little bit overweight to the field on him at 25%. But if you're just trying to choose which one of these fighters to play in like one individual lineup, the answer for me would be Abdul-Malik. Todorovic, just large field GPP leverage option. Next fight, Karolina Kowalkiewicz against Denise Gomes. And Gomes is a massive favorite in this fight, but this is also a fight that's minus 200 to go to the judges' scorecards. And it's going to be hard for me to prioritize a really expensive Denise Gomes over the likes of some of the other expensive fighters we've already talked about, like Malik, like Robertson, like Carlos Prates. And that's the opportunity cost to rostering somebody like Denise Gomes. And while Karolina Kowalkiewicz is definitely more aged at this point in her career, how many times have we seen her fight now in the UFC? Kowalkiewicz, she has been fighting in the UFC since 2015 when she beat Ronda Marcos in her UFC debut. She challenged for the belt against, how long ago was her title fight? Let's see. Yeah, here against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. That was in 2016. Boy, that's been, 8 years already? Almost exactly 8 years at this point since she challenged for the title, and that was not a particularly competitive fight. But anyway, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, she's been as close to the top as you could possibly be in this division, and now she's just somebody who's older. I thought she was going to retire a while ago, but she kind of put together a pretty decent win streak after she had lost, was it 1, 2, 3? Yeah, she loses 5 fights in a row, and you have to figure Kowalkiewicz is close to retiring. Then all of a sudden, she wins 4 in a row, and then they decide to give her a younger up-and-comer to give a little bit of shine to Jasmine Lucindo. Lucindo gets a pretty convincing win, and I think Denise Gomes is probably going to do more of the same here. But I think the most likely scenario is Denise Gomes wins by decision, and that's probably just not going to score well enough relative to the other high-priced options. So not a fight that I'm all that interested in. This is a fight that's impossible to not be interested in. Alazu Zaleski dos Santos taking on Zachary Scrogin. So Scrogin is taking this fight on short notice. He didn't make weight. He missed by, I think it was 3 pounds on the scale. And now you got a fighter here in Alazu Zaleski dos Santos who honestly might be getting the easiest opponent that he's gotten in his entire UFC career. And while Zaleski dos Santos is going to be turning 38 years old in a month, he still has a little bit left in the gas tank. We've seen him with recent wins over Abubakar Nurmagomedov. He also beat Benoit Saint-Denis just a couple of years ago. That was a very impressive performance. We just absolutely beat the brakes off of BSD. He had the draw against Rinat Fakhretdinov, and that was a fight where the early going, Fakhretdinov looked good in the first round, and then really, Zaleski dos Santos put it on him in the later stages to get a 10-8 in the final round to force a draw, and then a pretty competitive loss against Randy Brown his last time out. But Zachary Scrogin, I'm not convinced he's a UFC caliber opponent. And what we have here is Zaleski dos Santos still priced at $8K because he was priced from before there was an opponent switch. And now because of all the line movement we've had over the course of the week, after weigh-ins, this line just continues to move. Yeah, we've now got Alazi Zaleski dos Santos, anywhere from a minus 700 favorite to priced north of a minus 1,000 favorite at other books. So you're getting somebody who is as high as a minus 1,000 betting favorite, who's only priced at 8K on a slate where there's not all that much value. It's going to be really hard to avoid Alazu Zaleski dos Santos. We've got him projected as the most popular fighter on the card, which is going to be the case. He's pulling over 50% ownership. And even with all that ownership going to him, the Sims still gave me dos Santos in nearly all of my lineups. So he's the best overall play on the card. If you guys play cash games, he's an absolute must roster for cash games. And even for GPPs, he's going to be in the majority of my lineups. It's going to be chalky. But I just find him really, really difficult to get away from considering his price tag and how big of a favorite that he is. Next fight here, it is going to be Matthew Semelsberger against Charles Radtke. And Semelsberger is one of the underdogs that I like getting myself exposure to for this card. Semelsberger has a lot of finishing potential. He's a very good DraftKings scorer as well. He gets a lot of knockdowns. He lands nearly 4 significant strikes per minute. He's got a little bit of he's got no defensive wrestling, but offensive wrestling. He lands takedowns here and there. If you look at Matthew Semelsberger's fights, so last fight out against Preston Parsons, really, really poor effort for Semelsberger, and he was taken down 7 times. I don't think that's going to be a risk here against Radtke, though. And while that has been an Achilles heel for him, and I'm not sure that it's something he's cleared up, it doesn't really become an issue against Radtke, who has landed a total of 1 takedown in the UFC, and that was against Blood Diamond, who has 0 ability to wrestle. Training partner of Israel Adesanya, and kickboxer who, even outside of the UFC, hasn't had success in MMA. So that was the only takedown we see from Radtke. So I don't think that's going to be a threat for Semelsberger in this fight. So gets taken down by Preston Parsons. Okay. Fight before that, it was a competitive fight against Uros Medic. They each landed knockdowns in that fight. He ends up losing. Semelsberger should have beaten Jeremiah Wells, knocked him down twice, but just got overexcited, wasn't able to get a finish. But look at this. So a knockdown against Medic, 2 knockdowns against Jeremiah Wells, 3 knockdowns against Jake Matthews, a knockdown against Alex Morono, a knockdown here against Martin Sano. So lots of knockdowns, big time power for Matthew Semelsberger. And we are seeing Charles Radtke come off of a knockout loss. He recently got knocked out against Carlos Prates. Not even all that much of a layoff, only a few months before Radtke was back in the gym. That's a concern for me going up against somebody with big power like Matthew Semelsberger. I think this is a pretty decent matchup for him on paper. And when you consider the price tag on Semelsberger at $7,700, I only have 28% of him in my first run of lineups. That's going to be higher, though, as I get closer to lock tomorrow. I want to get myself to more of Matthew Semelsberger. He's one of the other fighters sub 8K that has real significant upside. So if you're looking to save salary, the fighters so far I've gone over that make sense. Semelsberger, Balanos, and then, of course, Elazu Zaleski dos Santos. Those are my 3 favorite cheap options to save salary with on the entire slate. I'm going to pick Semelsberger to win. I'm going to pick him to win by late finish as well. A couple fights left here to talk about. Cody Stamann against Stamann BlackShear. Next to no interest in this fight for me. I'm surprised how big of a favorite BlackShear is when you consider that he is coming off of a pretty brutal knockout loss. We saw him finish in just 18 seconds by Montel Jackson. Like the first strike that got thrown of the entire fight, just instantly KO'd Stamann BlackShear. Fights before that, in fairness, I thought he beat Mario Bautista. It was a very close competitive decision. Judges gave it to Bautista. I thought BlackShear won that fight. And then his fights before that, he beat Jose Johnson. He beat Juan Lacerda. And then he also had a pretty competitive decision loss to Farid Basharat. And then another majority decision loss to Yusuf Zalal. So a lot of competitive fights Stamann BlackShear has been in. The fight against Montel Jackson notwithstanding, where he got instantly KO'd. And Cody Stamann, I think, might be the toughest opponent, or at least the most veteran opponent with the best wins and the most experience of anybody that BlackShear has fought. So with that being the case, I'm really surprised to see BlackShear currently sitting at close to a minus 300 favorite, anywhere from like minus 260 to minus 290 as of Friday afternoon. So I don't really want to roster Cody Stamann all that much just because he's somebody who doesn't score all that well for DraftKings. There's next to no finishing equity in him. He lands some takedowns here and there. You see north of 2 landed per 15 minutes. He also lands a little bit over 4 significant strikes per minute, but it's been a minute since we've seen him get the wrestling going. So I think some of those numbers are a little bit misleading because we've not seen Cody Stamann land multiple takedowns in a fight since 2020 against Brian Kelleher. So a lot of those takedown numbers, it's based on fights that happened 5-6 years ago when Cody Stamann was a ranked fighter and he was more of a legit up-and-coming prospect. He's still somebody who's competitive and is able to fight hard against decent levels of competition. But I just don't think there's all that much scoring upside for Cody Stamann. And for Stamann BlackShear, it's the same issue with somebody like Denise Gomes. There's so many high-priced fighters that have big-time upside. I don't think it's all that likely that BlackShear is able to dominate Cody Stamann. I think BlackShear is most likely to win this fight by decision. But if I had to roster one of these two for DFS, I'd lean towards Cody Stamann just because of the price tag. But ultimately, a fight that I don't really think we need a roster, nor do I want all that much exposure to. Tresean Gore against Antonio Tricoli. I have concerns that if this fight goes to the judges' scorecards, it is just going to potentially score miserably. We have not seen Gore fight in the UFC for a pretty long time now. He is somebody who, even outside of the UFC, he constantly was pulling out of fights. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's pulled out of fights or has had canceled fights like twice as many as times that he's actually fought. And if you look at Tresean Gore, he is coming off what was probably the best performance of his career in a submission win over Josh Fremd. But that was 2 years ago at this point. And then a series of injuries has kept Tresean Gore out. And then Antonio Tricoli, he's another guy. He's dealt with injury issues. He had a PED suspension at one point. And the output is just so low on both these guys. Tricoli lands 1.28 significant strikes per minute. Then you got Gore lands 3.04. Gore is the more likely to wrestle of the two fighters, but at the same time, Tricoli is the better submission grappler. So I don't even know that Tresean Gore wants to be on the ground with him. I think this fight goes to the judges' scorecards, and the winner probably scores, I don't know, like 70 to 75 fantasy points just based on the low output of these two guys. So it's a fight I want to be underweight to, especially on the Tresean Gore side. He has some name value because he was somebody who was kind of hyped up on The Ultimate Fighter. So he's pulling north of 30% ownership. I have him in 22% of lineups right now. If I have to play one of these guys, it's going to be Tricoli just because of the price tag on him, but it's not a fight I'm going to be very invested in. And now finally, the first fight on the card, another very, very low-level WMMA fight here. Melissa Mullins against Claudia Sygula. And Melissa Mullins, she made her second UFC fight. Her debut came against Irina Aliskeva, and that was a fight she won that I didn't think she should have won. And then her second fight, she looked okay in the first round against Nora Cornell, basically pushed her up against the cage, didn't do all that much. And somehow without doing anything in the first round, she just like death gasses in the second round and ends up getting herself finished. So that was a fight that's terrible that I don't really know what to make of, other than that Melissa Mullins doesn't appear to have very good cardio. And then Sygula's been fighting super low levels of competition on the regional scene. So I don't know what to make of either of these fighters. It's another fight that is expected to go to the judges' scorecards. It's one that I'm going to be getting my exposure to elsewhere. Another one where if I have to roster one of the fighters, I would just lean towards Sygula because she's the cheaper fighter of the two. But this should be a really terrible fight to open up the card, and I'm just going to hope that somebody doesn't break the slate by scoring well for DraftKings purposes, because I won't have that much exposure to it. All right, guys, so there we have it. This is the 100th Apex card, and it is as Apex as it gets. Once again, we had the weight misses, we had fight cancellations, we got an 8K fighter who's a minus 1,000 favorite. We've got a very weird main event between Neil Magny and Carlos Prates. But next week, the return of John Jones taking on Stipe Miocic. That should be something that's going to be interesting. Really big pay-per-view card there. So next week, we'll be back with another breakdown. If you guys haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck this weekend.